Haunted Ohio by Chris Woodyard. Volume 1, Chapter 15. The Headless Motorcyclist and Other Haunted Conveyances. The dead travel fast. The last journey. The Egyptians buried ships to carry their dead to the afterlife. The Greeks placed a coin in their corpses' mouths to pay Charon to ferry them across the river Styx. The Vikings, who called death the journey elsewhere, placed their dead warriors on a boatload of treasure, and then set the sails to the west and torched the ship into a floating pyre. We have not come so far from these traditions. Our dead, in their boat-like coffins, travel in glossy black hearses. A motorcycle gang leader is buried with his Harley. A woman asked to ride it to eternity in her favorite pink Cadillac. Death is a journey we will all make one day. A journey that some souls are still making. Doggy Cross's Ghost. With the colorful history of steam transport on the Ohio River, it's strange that there are no spectral steamboats plying Ohio, full of ghost gamblers dicing for their souls. One of the few river ghosts is that of the steamer Kanawha. In January of 1916, the Kanawha wrecked in Lock Number 19 on the Ohio River. No lives were lost, but shortly after the wreck, strange lights began to be seen on the foot of the rock bluff along the Ohio shoreline, just west of Mustapha Island. The lights were seen in good weather and bad for many years, and were witnessed by hundreds of people, including experienced rivercraft personnel. First noticed by pilot Monroe Doggy Cross, the lights were known as Doggy Cross's Ghost, or the Mustapha Island Ghost. The Spectral Sailors. In the 1880s, 2 sailors fell to their deaths from the top mast of a Lake Erie sailing vessel. The rumor got about the ship was unlucky, Jonah, as many of the crew were reluctant to join her. One of them wrote an account of the ghost of the Chicago Times in 1885. On its arrival to Buffalo, the men went to shore as soon as they were paid off. They said the ship had lost her luck. While we were discharging at the elevator, the story got around and some of the grain trimmers refused to work on her. Even the mate was affected by it. At last we got ready to sail for Cleveland, where we were to load coal. The captain managed to get a crew by going to a crimp press gang operator who ran them, fresh from the salt water. They came on board 2/3 drunk, and the whole mate was steering them into the forecastle when one of them stopped and said, pointing aloft, "What have you got a figurehead on the mast for?" And the mate looked up and then turned pale. "It's Bill," he said. And with that, the whole lot jumped onto the dock. Didn't see anything, but the mate told the captain to look for another officer. The captain was too much affected that he put me on another schooner, and then shipped a new crew and sailed to Cleveland. They never got there. They were sunk by a steamer off Dunkirk. Gretchen's Ghost. A network of canals built in the early 1800s opened up the Ohio Territory to commerce and statehood. At Beaver Creek State Park in Columbia County, there survives part of a lock and canal system from 1836. One of the locks is named Gretchen Lock, a charming tribute to a family member, one might think, but the place has a macabre history. Gil Hans, the engineer who built the lock, put his family over from Holland. His younger daughter, Gretchen, pinned for the low county until, weakened, she contracted malaria and died August 12, 1838, raving about going home. Distraught, Hans had Gretchen's coffin temporarily entombed in a vault within the locked stonework until the family could return to Holland together. He made arrangements to sail. Gretchen's coffin was loaded onto the ship, and the entire family sailed into oblivion. The ship went down in an Atlantic storm with all hands. Yet even death could not take Gretchen home. On the anniversary of her death, the young Dutch girl can be seen walking along the loch that bears her name. The Camera Shy Ghost. Another loch at Beaver Creek State Park is named Jake's Loch, after a former loch keeper. He always carried a lantern when he went about his duties at night. But one night he was struck by lightning and fell into the water, a blackened, smoking corpse. Now Jake seems to come and go as he did when he was alive, taking the day shift, then the night shift. Some nights you can still see his lantern shining brightly underneath the water. Oddly, when Jake's spirit is present at the loch, no camera will function. Perhaps the flash reminds him of the lightning that caused his death. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. The stories are always the same. A driver picks up a young woman hitchhiker. Often she's not dressed for the weather, and he gallantly gives her his coat. When he arrives at the address she's given him, the woman has mysteriously vanished from the locked car. Inquiring at the house, he is told that she has been dead for some time, killed in an auto accident. When he visits the young woman's grave, he finds his jacket draped on her tombstone. Why do these girls wander about the highways, waiting for the one driver who will stop? They're wet, lonely, and unhappy. They only want to go home to their mothers, to warmth and to life. They never quite make it, though. Their last stop is always the grave. But they try and they try again, standing by the road with the patience of the dead, waiting for the driver who will give them a lift home. Folklorist Richard Gill heard the following tale in his high school folklore class in Fostoria. My father was driving down the road between Arcanda and Fostoria and saw a woman in a long white evening gown. She was not hitchhiking, but walking down the side of the road. He stopped and offered her a ride. When he offered her the front seat, she ignored him. He got out and opened the back door. She got in. He then went around the car and got in the front seat. When he got in, she had disappeared. The student said that this had happened to her father. Then an odd thing occurred. 2 other students in the class responded that the same thing had happened to their fathers. Gill questioned them and determined from their comments that the events occurred between November 1971 and February 1972 on a stretch of road between Arcanda and Fostoria. All 3 tales were alike in detail. White evening gown, a woman's indifferent silence, the even deep silence of the empty car. A traveling spirit. On the edge of Quaker City, on State Route 513 North, stands a small bridge haunted by a ghost who enjoys buggy rides. That makes more sense. Travelers by night first saw him walking by the side of their buggies, and the next thing they knew, he'd be sitting companionably next to them in the seat. The ghost also had a horribly friendly habit of coming up behind a traveler and tapping him on the shoulder. Fortunately, the ghost, like so many supernatural creatures, couldn't cross running water, so he waved goodbye to terrified travelers at the bridge. The ghost of Flight 191. From Cincinnati comes the story of a man who saw the ghost of a doomed airline 10 days before her fiery death. David Booth woke up in a cold sweat. The dream had been too vivid. An American Airlines jet cartwheeling into a ball of flames. It was a three-engine plane coming in for a landing, only the engines didn't sound right. Then the plane rolled over and slammed into the ground, flames fountaining into the air. Booth closed his eyes, but the picture replayed itself, over and over. It was like I was standing there watching the whole thing, Booth said, like watching a television. And the next night he dreamed the same dream, more vividly than ever. I did everything to stop sleeping from then on. I'd watch TV until 2 a.m. One night I got drunk. But for 7 more nights the dream reoccurred. Finally, Tuesday, the 22nd May, Booth decided he had to do something. He called American Airlines. He called the Federal Aviation Administration. He called Cincinnati's airport control. There, he was finally taken seriously. It didn't sound like a prank. The Cincinnati airport official, Ray Pinkerton, Thursday, 24th May. Pinkerton's colleague, Paul Williams, got Booth's story. What he described to me, I thought might be a 727 because I knew that American Airlines flew Boeing 727s. Another possibility was a DC-10. He specifically identified it as an American Airlines craft with an engine on the tail. He described his vantage point as beside a gravel road running up towards a flat-roofed building. He described the plane at a rather low altitude, which I took to be 200 to 400 feet. It suddenly turned sharply and dived into the ground. He described in great detail the explosion. He became quite distraught, almost as if he was seeing death occurring. William was convinced, but maddeningly, no one could think of anything to do. On Friday, May 25th, American Airlines Flight 191, a 3-engined DC-10, crashed on takeoff at O'Hare. One of the engines broke away. The plane turned over on its back and crashed into flames. Said Paul Williams, I heard about the crash on Friday afternoon on my way home from work, around 5 p.m. As I was listening to the description of the crash on the radio, it sounded like a replay of what I'd heard the day before from David. It was uncanny, said FAA official Jack Barker. Booth named the airline. He called the right type of plane, 3 engines. He said the plane came in inverted, which it did, and of course he reported it to officials just before it happened. And Paul Williams reflects, perhaps the most remarkable coincidence of the whole thing was the similarity of the maneuver the plane made. It's a very unusual maneuver for a plane to make before crashing. Most of them crash with wings horizontal. They run into some obstruction or there's a mid-air collision. But the maneuver David described was very unusual. As a matter of fact, it's the only one I've heard of in a plane that size. The Chicago DC-10 crash of 1979 was the worst air accident in the United States, with 173 people killed. Chilling pictures of the falling plane caught by an amateur photographer etched the tragedy in the minds of all who saw them. But for David Booth, the nightmare pictures of a doomed plane were finally ended. The Headless Motorcyclist. An anonymous wag had said, "Death is nature's way of telling you to slow down." But death has not yet slowed the pace of a motorcyclist doomed to spend eternity repeating his final ride in the Great Black Swamp. The legend goes that there's a serviceman returning from the Great War rode his motorcycle to visit his girlfriend, only to find that she had married another. Enraged, he rode off, took a curve too fast, and went into a bridge railing. When they found the body, it was headless. Ever since then, if you blink your headlights and honk your horn on the anniversary of the accident, the motorcycle will repeat his final ride. In 1968, folklorist Richard Gill investigated this story. The moon is up. I am riding. It seems like I've ridden this road 1,000 times before. Always on a cold March night, with the stars shivering above the flatness of the northern Ohio plains. I am going to see the girl who will soon be my wife. The farmhouse looks the same, a little smaller than I remembered, but then it looks small compared to a war. Cut the engine at the road, unfastened my helmet, and wheeled the bike up to the house the way I used to. I hope she doesn't hear the crunching of the wheels on the drive. I want to surprise her. On March 21st of that year, Gill went to the site near Elmore with a friend, a tape recorder, and 2 cameras. 1 movie camera and a still camera set to take a series of time and exposures. They parked the car, then blinked the lights 3 times and honked the horn 3 times. A light appeared at the farmhouse, moved down its driveway, down the road, and then disappeared around the middle of the bridge. She smells like lilacs. No other girl, not even the street women in France, had ever smelled like that. We were to be married, she understood, when I returned from the war. If I didn't come back, well, we never discussed it. Sometimes in the muck of the trenches, I thought of her sitting in the rocker in the kitchen, grown old and unmarried in her father's house, lifting her head at an unexpected sound, thinking it might be me coming back to claim her. I thought of her pining for me, struggling on her deathbed to raise and embrace my ghost. Her father didn't approve of me, said I spent too much time roaming around on the machine of mine. It's an Indian, a real beauty from her V.1 engine to her gleaming red paint. I kept her in good trim. She's like a woman, needs to be fed and cosseted and complimented. Sometimes I dream about riding her at speeds that only happen in dreams, taking curves, heeled over at incredible angles, defying gravity, laughing at death. But her father hated me because I want to take her away from the farm. I wanted to take her to town, get a job in a factory, buy her a house with a picket fence and an indoor plumbing and electric lights. Her father thought I was full of crazy schemes. Sometimes, returning from the chores, foul to the knees, he'd see us sitting on the porch swinging and doing a bout face to the barn, until I said goodnight and left her sulking on the swing. Like most girls, she could be moony, always wanting flowers and whispered sweet talk, but it would have been all right once we were married. There was a song we sang in the trenches, "Whose little heart are you breaking now?" Sometimes I wondered if she was sitting on the porch swing with anyone else. Those days I wished we could go over to the top with bayonets fixed instead of sitting in the mud, taking board pot shots at helmets stuck up on sticks and washing hung out to dry. She's beautiful, I guess, It has been a long time since I last saw her face. The night I left, she wore a white dress with finicky little ruffles that made her push me away when I tried to kiss her. The air was full of lilacs, or maybe that was something I thought up later. I marched in mud to my eyebrows, past dead men bloated and rotten in the trenches. I thought of her so fragrant, so pure in that white dress. Things may not be the same, my folks warned me, but what could have changed? A promise is a promise. Gil's friend tried to string across the road in the middle of the bridge. He returned to the car, blinked the lights 3 times, and honked the horn 3 times. The light appeared again, moved down the road, and disappeared in the center of the bridge. They got out of the car to examine the string and found that it was intact. It was dark when I got there, and cold in the late night dark. Cold in the late spring dark. I looked through the window, hoping to catch her unawares, but before she saw me, she was standing at the table peeling potatoes. The light in the kitchen made her look golden, like a Christmas angel. Her hair stood around her face in little wisps like a halo. And then he came up behind her and put his arms around her. She leaned back into his arms like he owned her. I tore open the door. She screamed as if she'd seen a ghost. I stared at her white face while words buzzed in my ears. Words I couldn't understand. I couldn't hear them. She raised her hand to show me a ring. It sparkled in the lamplight. He took her hand shelteringly, protectively. I lifted a hand to stop the words that buzzed like insects around my head. Then I turned and I went into the dark. The insects followed me. If she watched me go, I never saw. Gil's friend then decided to stand in the middle of the road. Gil went back to the car to blink the lights and honk the horn. Once again the light appeared, moved down the road, and disappeared in the center of the bridge. Gil waited, and waited some more. When his friend did not return, Gil went looking for him. The man had disappeared from his place in the center of the road. When Gil finally found him in the ditch, he was unconscious, apparently badly beaten. Gil brought him around, but he had no idea what had happened. At first, Gil thought that his friend was faking it or playing a joke, but he knew his friend's character well, and it didn't seem very likely. The muddy gravel drive sank under my wheels as I turned the bike around. I stopped at the road, mechanically pulling on my gloves, my goggles. In the ditches, the water stood, sky deep. The moon stared at me like the reflection of a long-dead friend, floating face up in the trenches. I turned the throttle. The wind cut my face, my scarf whipped over my eyes, and I struck it away. The wind brought them off, and I let them go. Tumbling into the darkness, I urged the motorcycle on, rocking and heaving as if I were forcing myself to her. Love had nothing to do with it, any more than love had anything to do with this road or the wind screaming in my ears. I twisted the throttle open, leaving behind everything weak and weary and sad. For the team's 4th experiment, they moved the car into the road on the near side of the bridge, facing away from the farmhouse. They blinked the lights 3 times and honked the horn 3 times. As the light appeared, they accelerated slowly. The light came from behind, passed through the car, and went on into the front of the car, only to disappear in the center of the bridge again. It was that time, says Gil, that he began to believe in ghosts. His friend wanted to stay and perform other experiments, but since it was Gil's car, they had to keep going. The movie film showed nothing. The still camera showed a light source of some kind, and the tape recorder picked up a humming sound. And the headlamp wavered with each rut and rock. Icy tears blinded me. My gauntlets were slick with wiping them away. We hit the curve at the bridge. The wheels tore at the gravel, then broke free. We plunged over the bridge, and then off the road, the exhaust snarling. I saw the fence, its barbed wire stars glittering with frost in the light of the headlamp. Then my head spun, and I saw sky, and I fell like a hedge apple into the frosted weeds. Far away I saw my body, lying half beneath the bike, which struggled in the grass like a wounded animal. And then everything was still. I don't know how long I lay there. The night was cold. I saw the moon smiling, unconcerned, closer than my headlight. I heard a horn honk 3 times, and then I rose again from the frozen grass and screamed to the stars. Where is my head, my head, my head, my head? The moon is up. I'm riding. The end.